Hello everyone, my name is Satish Gupta and I'm your instructor for macroeconomics. My goal is to record lectures on each chapter, starting with chapter 10. So we're going to cover chapter 10 today. So this is our goal is for chapter 10. It's titled The Business Cycle, and this is our learning objective for this particular chapter. Our goal is to learn how economic growth is measured, how unemployment is measured, what is inflation, like prices are going up or going down. So we're gonna learn what is inflation, and we'll also learn how inflation is measured. And then we'll briefly talk about inflation impact on consumers like you and me. Then what is the goal of the society? Like our goal for the society is full employment. So how is full employment defined? You'll be surprised to learn that full employment does not mean 0% unemployment. So we'll explain you that in this chapter. What do we mean by full employment? And the second goal of this chapter is to learn about price stability. What that means is how do we achieve a very low inflation every year? Like for example, our current goal set by the Federal Reserve Bank is 2%. That we want average price level to go up by 2% and not more. So we'll learn about price stability. And we'll also learn about economic growth. What is our goal for economic growth and how do we go about achieving it? And finally, in this chapter, we're going to learn what has been our track record on all these issues. Have we achieved full employment all the time? Have we achieved price stability? And have we achieved our goal in economic growth? Economic growth means how the economy is growing. As the economy grows, it leads to more jobs and leads to higher standard of living. So that's what we learn. That's what our goal is in this class, in this particular chapter. So let's flip the page. So economics. So what we're studying in this particular class is macroeconomics. There are two main branches of economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics. And as you know, we are learning macroeconomics. Some of you may have taken microeconomics in an earlier class or somewhere else. But so the field of macroeconomics came into existence after the Great Depression. There was no macroeconomics before the Great Depression. There was only microeconomics, and it explained everything. Then the Great Depression happened, and microeconomics, the knowledge we had at that time, failed us. According to the economics that existed, they didn't call it micro or macro, they just called it economics. According to our understanding of economics prior to Great Depression in the 1930s, well, the economy is very resilient and recessions or depressions could not happen. And then the Great Depression happened and it gave birth to a new field of economics called macroeconomics. So what is macroeconomics? In macroeconomics is the study of aggregate behavior of the economy. So what do we mean by aggregate behavior? Here what we are talking about is the overall economy as compared to microeconomics. In microeconomics, we want to learn how individuals are doing, how individual companies are doing. Let's say government increases a tax on people, how people will behave. If government increases corporate tax, how the corporations will behave. In this field of macroeconomics, we're not worried about individuals, or we're not worried about individual company or corporation. Like we're not concerned about how Ford is doing or Microsoft doing. Or go look at the overall picture. What do we mean by overall picture? What we're looking at overall level of unemployment or employment. For example, our goal for unemployment is 5%, as you would learn later on as to why we set it 5%. But anyway, our present goal for unemployment is 5%. So we want to see whether we are achieving this. So we're looking at the overall picture of the economy. How the people are people able to find a job easy, or it's very difficult. We want to see whether the economy is growing or not. Our goal for economic growth is 3% a year. So, like for example, if you read the newspaper these days, our economic growth is shrink. Our economic growth is actually negative. What that means, economy instead of growing is actually shrinking. So that's what we study in macroeconomics. Why the economic growth is going down or shrinking, and we learn about it. We keep track of overall economy by seeing inflation. Inflation is the average increase in price level. In an economy, some prices are going up, some are going down. So our goal is to figure out what is the overall level of price level. Is it increasing or decreasing? So that's what our goal is in this. So that's the study of aggregate behavior. We look at the overall picture. People are able to find jobs. The economy is growing at the rate we expect or historically we have achieved. Is the level of inflation, the level of price increase is within the goal set by us, or it is increasing a lot higher. Economists usually worry about inflation if inflation is too high. For example, our current goal is 2%. If the inflation is 3, 4, or 5%, we worry. But economists also worry that inflation is below 2%. And why as to economists worry, that's a different topic we'll cover at some point. But suffice is to say, is that a lot of economists believe that inflation is less than 2% or 1%, it may lead to recession. So we'll cover that later. Anyway, so as I told you earlier, there was no field of macroeconomics. There was only economic that explained everything. So because Great Depression happened and the economic understanding prior to Great Depression did not foresee a depression, so we have macroeconomics. So what is the goal of macroeconomics? Goal of macroeconomics is to understand what causes this fluctuation in the economy. Like for example, in 2008, we had a huge economic crisis. And right now we are going through another economic crisis. So our goal is to understand what is the cause of all this fluctuation in the economy. What is the economy? See, on average, economy grows at the rate of 3% a year. Let's say economy is worth $10 trillion today. That means every year it should grow at the rate of 3% a year. But economy grows sometimes 3%, sometimes it shrinks, sometimes it grows 5%, then next year it shrinks. So we want to understand, why can't we just grow at the even rate of 3%? Why is all these fluctuations? And then our second goal is how to avoid recession and depression. Like for example, if you read newspaper these days, we are worried that we may go through a depression, at least a big recession. So what can we do to avoid recession or depression? That is the goal of this particular field of economics called macroeconomics. Second goal is, if we are not able to avoid recession or depression, can we make it less severe? Instead of economy shrinking by 10%, can we make it shrink only by 1% by pursuing some policies? Or we can shorten the duration. Like Great Depression lasted for many years, 4 or 5 years. Our goal is to understand how the economy works. Our goal is to understand how the recession and depression is caused, and then come up with the policies that can either avoid the recession or depression. But what we have learned is we cannot avoid recession and depression. Then can we make it less severe? It's not very painful. Every time we have recession and depression, a lot of people lose their jobs, lose their income. And now we make it severe and make it last very short time. Average recession lasts 10 months. So our goal is to shorten duration rather than 5 or 6 years that the Great Depression took to resolve itself. So this economic fluctuation in the economy, the business fluctuation in the economy, is called a business cycle. So definite business cycle is altered periods of economic growth and contraction. So economy does not just grow, like I told you earlier. Economy has grown at the rate of 3% a year over the past 100 years, the average. But this 3% has been very uneven. There have been periods of time when we grew at 6%. And there have been periods of time where we shrank 4 or 5%. So business cycle is going up and down. That means alternate periods of economic growth and contraction. And it's shown by this graph also. On this axis, I have time, say from 1960 to 2010, and then you have economic growth. So this is the 3%. This is what we have average growth at the rate of 3% a year. But you can see, even though average has been 3%, there's a number for 3% right here. But our growth has been very uneven. Some period we have grown at more than 4%, some period we have 0, and some period we have shrunk negative. So again, our average growth for the past 100 years has been 3% average. But in a particular year, we can grow at 6% or we can shrink. So that is our goal, to understand why we have this big economic fluctuation. Why can't we just grow at the rate of 3%? So this is what our goal is to study, is to what causes recession, what causes depression, what can we do about it? Do we have enough understanding of how the economy works, so we can pursue policies where we can either completely get rid of recession, depression, but as I told you earlier, what we have found out that we are not able to completely get rid of recessions. We only had one depression, but it looks like we're going to have one more coming up very soon. So that is what our goal is in this chapter. Okay. Since the Great Depression 1930s, economists have developed 3 diagnostic tools to measure the health of the economy. So for example, when you are sick, the first diagnostic tool we have, or first diagnostic tool the doctor has, is to measure your temperature. If your temperature is high, that tells you you have some sort of illness. Or if you have high blood pressure, they take your blood pressure, they take your pulse. So same way, economists have developed 3 diagnostic tools to measure the health of the economy. So what are those tools? One is measure output, which is measured by GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product, which we'll study in great detail in this particular chapter very soon. So like I told you, we have on average, we have grown at the rate of 3% a year. So when the growth is less than 3%, we worry. If the growth is more than 3%, then we want to know how did we achieve it, so we can achieve that way. So that's one way to achieve whether the economy is growing. Because as the economy grows, it leads to more jobs, and also leads to more higher standard of living for all the citizens. Second is unemployment. When the economy is sick, it leads to a lot of people getting laid off and a lot of loss of income. So we keep track of unemployment. Just to let you know, our goal right now is 5% of unemployment. As to why we started 5% and not 0, that's something we'll discuss that later. Explain you why we started at 5%. And the third diagnostic tool is inflation. So again, like I told you earlier, our goal for inflation is, it used to be 3% and now it's 2%. The inflation goal is set by Federal Reserve Bank. And currently all over the world, all the central banks, at least in developed countries, the rich countries, they all have settled for a rate of inflation of 2%. Okay, so these are the 3 tools, and now we're going to talk about all the tools. Let's first talk about the first tool. First tool is measuring output. Like I told you earlier, we have grown at the rate of 3% a year, and whenever the economic growth is less than 3%, we worry. And sometimes the economy shrinks, and then we worry too much. Okay, so output is measured by a unit or index called GDP. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. This is the index that we use to measure output. So what is GDP? GDP is all the final goods and services produced. And I'm going to explain you what do I mean by final. So again, let's go over the definition really quick. GDP stands for all the final goods and services produced within the boundary of a country over a period of time, measured in monetary terms. Now I'm going to explain you every term, everything that is highlighted or double line. I want to explain you. So let's say goods and services. What that means, all goods are goods like that you, for example, cars. Cars example of good produce. Corn, a tractor is an example of a good. Services is like when you get education, that's a service. When you go to bank, it's a service. When you watch a movie on Netflix, it's a service. So all the final goods and services produced. What do we mean by final? Here, what we mean is that we want to only count goods that are used as a final consumption. For example, let's say example steel. You know, companies are producing steel. We do not count steel as part of the GDP. Why? Because steel is eventually used in cars. So when cars are sold, the price of steel is in the car. So if you include cars and then we also include steel, then it'll be double counting. So that's the final goods and services. Within the boundary of a country, what that means, whatever is produced, let's say example, USA. Everything that is produced, goods and services produced in the country, in USA, is part of our GDP. Let's say IBM manufactures, IBM as you know is an American company, and IBM manufactures computers in Japan. That computer that's manufactured in Japan is part of Japan's GDP, not ours. Let's say Toyota. Toyota, as you know, Toyota manufactures cars in USA. They manufacture cars in, I think, Tennessee. Honda makes in Ohio. So even though it's a Japanese company, Toyota, and Honda is a Japanese company, the car they manufacture in America, because they're in our border, they are part of our GDP. So that's very important. Over a period of time, so this GDP number comes out every 3 months and once a year also. So it's measured period over time, over a month or over 3 months, over 6 months, over a year. Measured in monetary terms, that means measured in money. Why we say measured in monetary terms? See, economy produces tens of thousands of items like cars, corn, blade, movies. There's no way to get a handle of all these different units because you cannot add car with corn. So what we do is every item that is produced in America is expressed in money. And then money can be all added up to come at a number as to how much production has taken place. So all the goods and services produced in the country over a period of time within our borders converted into money is GDP. The current USA GDP is $19.4 trillion. These are 2017 numbers. It's really not current, but these are numbers I have. So GDP in 2017 was 19.4 trillion. So this is the total production of goods and services by all the citizens that were working. But whether a country is rich or poor is not determined by this number. Like India has a big GDP, but the population is very big. So in order to see whether the country is rich or poor, we have another index called PCI, which stands for per capita income. What that means is if this GDP is equally divided, it's not equally divided, but suppose it's equally divided, how much per person would have in terms of production? So let's say, as I told you in 2017, our GDP was $19.4 trillion. And our population was 326 million. So to get a per capita income, what do? You take the GDP of the country like USA, which is 19.4 trillion, and you divide by the population of that country, total population of the country, and our population in 2017 was roughly 326 million. Now you be very careful. This is in trillion and this is in million. So these terms cannot be divided. So either you have to convert this into a trillion or this into a million. So what I've done is I converted this 19.4 trillion into millions because this is million also. So basically I converted first into billions. So you add 3 zeros to get to billion. And then if you want million, you add another 3 zeros. So I added 3 zeros here and 3 here and divide by the population, which is millions. Now I have million, they cancel out. So we have a per capita income of 59,509. Again, what that means is all the GDP that was produced and expressed in money, it was equally divided. Every person will have access to $59,509 worth of goods and services in that year. Remember, this is for a whole year, 2017. Okay, we move on. Okay, now you have to be very careful. There are two terms. One is called nominal. Nominal in economics means in current prices. In current prices. So remember, whenever we say nominal, that means in current prices. So nominal GDP is GDP in current prices. Real GDP is GDP adjusted for change in prices. So now keep in mind, government always prints money. All over the world, government prints money. And what that does is it leads to inflation. So everything costs more. For example, a bread used to cost 5 cents in 1900. Now it's cost almost $2. Why? Why? Because the government has printed so much money that the value of money has declined. So GDP can increase due to increase in production, or GDP can increase due to increase in prices, or GDP can increase due to combination of some increase in price, some increase in production. So remember, nominal GDP is in the current prices. Real GDP is GDP adjusted for change in prices. So remember, our welfare is increased not because price has gone up. Our welfare increases when we have more production at our disposal. So our goal is to figure out, hey, how much production has gone up? We don't care about how much the price has gone up. We want to care how much production has gone up, because more production means more goods every citizen will have. So what we do is in order to figure out real GDP, we take the change in nominal GDP, that means GDP in current prices, and deduct change in price level. How do we measure change in price level? Which will be the subject of this chapter, in this chapter later on. So remember, we'll cover how you measure change in price level later on. So real GDP, which is a measure of how much production has gone up, is arrived at by figuring change in nominal GDP minus the change in price level. So let's say in 2010, a nominal GDP went up by 6%, GDP in current prices. But during that time frame, price level on average went up 3%. So that means our real GDP has gone up only 3%. So keep that in mind. This term nominal and real is not only used for GDP, it's also used for a lot of other variables also. Let's say interest rate. I said nominal interest. Like for example, right now nominal interest, if you go to a bank, say for example, and you get 1% interest. So I have $10,000 that I take to the bank and give me 1%. But that's the current price. Interest rate is 1% right now. But during that time, say the inflation is 2%. So I'm getting 1%, but my purchasing power is going down by 2%. So what is the real interest rate? Is minus 1%. Why? Change in this case, real nominal interest is 1%, but the price level is 2%. So 1 minus 2 will give me 2, minus 1. That means the real interest rate is minus 1%. So now I'm going to explain you recession. Recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth as measured by GDP. So let's say current situation. Let's say government numbers come out for this year. From January till March, our GDP is declined by 2% because of this coronavirus. And then April, May, June, as you know, a lot of people have been laid off. The number comes out that in the second quarter, which is April, May, June, economy shrunk by 10%. So then the Bureau of Labor and Statistics will define that we are officially in a recession. So remember, definition of a recession is that 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. So average duration of a recession is 10 months. We had 14 recessions since 1929. How do we make a distinction between recession and depression? So as I told you, recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth as measured by GDP. Depression is severe and prolonged recession. If a recession is very severe, like in 1930s, production went down by 25%, 20% people were laid off. Severe and prolonged recession is called depression. But some economists have tried to quantify it. So let's say, how do we quantify it? So according to them, remember this is some economists that try to quantify this term. Like you know a recession, 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, and then we are in a recession. Depression is severe and prolonged recession, and if you want to quantify it, this is symbol of greater than or equal. 10. So unemployment is 10% or more. That means if there are 100 people, 10 people looking for jobs, 10 or more. That's one. And the economy has shrunk by 10% or more. So if a particular economic situation or a particular country meets both the criterias in terms of 10% or more of unemployment, 10% or more of negative economic growth, a shrinkage in the GDP, then we call that country officially in depression. For example, in 2008, there were 3 countries that actually went through depression-like condition: Portugal, Spain, and Greece. In our case, our unemployment went up to 10% or more, but our economy shrank only like 5.5%. So our was a severe recession, but it was not classified as depression. So we'll conclude over here, and the next topic we will cover is inflation. Thank you.